Oh, come on, man.
I don't like him. I don't like that offense.
Oh, 100%.
I like Kirk Cousins. I'll fight everyone on this.
He's one of these guys that I'm a big believer in.
Who would we have ranked higher right now?
Are you serious? You don't actually believe that.
Welcome into the Fantasy Pros Football Podcast. My name is Kyle Yates, and I am your host. No Bobby today, as he is out spending some time with family, which is always needed. I am joined today, though, by the great Mike Tagliere, and you can find both of us on Twitter at KyleYNFL and at Mike Tagliere NFL. You can also find and follow us on Instagram, at KyleYNFL and at Mike Tagliere. Tags, we are officially turning the corner towards fantasy football season here, man. Are you ready for this?
I am. It's the obviously Monday right after July 4th, and we're starting the Scott Fish Bowl, which always signifies like the start of when everybody starts getting into fantasy football. So today's show should be a fun one.
Yeah, and to do that, we brought along Chris Raybon. He is an NFL analyst from the Action Network. You can find him on Twitter at Chris Raybon. Chris, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me, guys. Excited to do this, and hopefully we get some football. Fingers crossed. No preseason looks like, but the regular season, the show should be ready to go. So we're gonna will ourselves to a season by drafting a team here.
Yeah. For sure. Yeah. And by the way, Chris, I wanted to tell you on the show. So Chris does Sirius XM as well with Matthew Friedman. And I heard you guys talking this weekend, and I just wanted to say that I take your side in the Aaron Jones conversation that you had with him, and that, he's overvaluing A.J. Dillon. So I'm with you on that side of the
Oh my God. Thank you so much. I mean, A.J. Dillon is a second-round pick. I get it. But Aaron Jones led the tied for the league lead in touchdowns last year. Coaches aren't just going to start giving a rookie carries at the goal line over the reigning rushing touchdown leader. So thank you, sir. I appreciate that. I'll be sure to laugh at Friedman for that one.
All right, guys, we are doing a half PPR mock draft today. But first, I want to make sure that you all know that we're doing this on the multi-user draft. It's incredibly easy to use and has the same interface as the draft simulator. The only difference between this and the draft simulator is that you practice against other human opponents. This will allow you to get a feel for what your drafts are actually going to be like with crazy twists and turns and probably someone taking Lamar Jackson #1 overall. So multi-user drafts are now available in the Draft Wizard's mock draft lobby. Even though the season won't be starting for a couple more months, it's never too early for you to get practice drafts in. So please check out both the mock draft lobby and our draft simulator at fantasypros.com/draftwizard. Again, that's fantasypros.com/draftwizard. All right, Tags, you want to go over the league format for us here?
Yeah, for sure. We're going to go half PPR. It seems like it's a good medium between standard and PPR. We understand that there's a lot of different things, and we're going to be doing some more mock drafts throughout the offseason, but we feel like half PPR is a good place to start. We're going to do a 1 quarterback league, 2 running backs, 3 wide receivers, 1 tight end, 2 flex spots, and then 6 bench. We are not going to be drafting kickers and defense today because, well, let's be honest. All of us would be waiting until the last round anyway. So basically, we didn't want it to affect the score at all. So obviously, Bobby's not here, and if you guys can see in the YouTube channel right now, you could actually see my team name is TGBNH. That's thank God Bobby's not here, because Bobby always wins mock drafts, and it kind of sucks going against him because, well, he's one of the creators of the algorithm. So I have a chance to win today, guys.
Well, knowing Bobby, he's still probably going to somehow get the #1 overall pick. Like, that is probably going to happen. So, remember that you can watch all this play out at youtube.com/fantasypros, and you can view the draft board there live along with all of our other NFL podcast content. All right, Tags, Chris, you ready to get this going?
Yes, sir.
All right, Chris. So I'm going to click Start Draft. It's going to randomize it. It's not fixed like when Bobby does it. But, Chris, what position do you want in the draft? Like, if you were drafting today and you had the choice of what draft pick you would have, would you be taking the 101?
Absolutely. I want Christian McCaffrey.
Yep, same. All right, so let's see who gets him. We're going to start draft right now. It's going to have 90 seconds on the clock for each of us to make a pick. Obviously, most of the time we're not going to use all that, but we're going to try and talk our way through these selections as they happen. And you can see the new and improved Draft Wizard. None of us got the first pick, so well, none of us are getting Christian McCaffrey.
Yeah, it looks like Tag's got the 102, I got the 105, and Chris got the 107. Chris, you happy with that draft slot? I know you wanted 101.
No. I do not want to be picking in the middle of fantasy drafts this year. It is because then you start getting into, do I take Dalvin Cook, and it's a sticky spot to be in.
for sure.
It definitely is. And so I got pick number 2. I'm not mad about that. Yates got pick 5. Pick number 2, I mean, we're talking about the entire season. So Saquon Barkley seems like to be the consensus number 2 pick, and probably rightfully so considering what he's done in his young career. He has a shot to finish RB1. Not many guys can say that, but he's that true 3-down back. That offensive line has been improved throughout the offseason. It is a half PPR format. If it was full PPR, believe it or not, I would actually consider Alvin Kamara here, but I'm going to play it safe, and I'm going to say Saquon Barkley.
I can't fault you for that pick. I mean, at the 102 there, it's a little bit of a drop-off from McCaffrey, but then I think Barkley is kind of solidified in this tier by himself towards the top there. You could make the argument for Zeke, and he went at the 103. So then Devontae Adams at the 104, so I am now on the clock at the 105. And I'm looking at guys like Michael Thomas, Alvin Kamara, Derrick Henry. Again, Chris mentioned it with Dalvin Cook. I could play that game. But I'll leave that for Chris to determine. So it's between Alvin Kamara and Michael Thomas for me here, and it all depends on how I want to play my draft out. Do I want to take a running back early and see if I can load up on wide receiver later, or do I want to try to find these running backs later on in the second and third rounds? As far as Alvin Kamara, I've talked about it previously on this podcast, that 18 total touchdowns in 2018 to then 5 in 2019. He was dealing with injuries all last season. I just don't think we saw what Alvin Kamara was fully healthy. And even with that being said, while he was dealing with injuries, he only finished as the RB12. Like, it wasn't a super far drop-off. So he has a very, very safe floor. And so I'm going to go with Kamara here to start out my team. I want to see how this plays out with drafting the New Orleans Saints running back.
Now, Chris, what's your order of the top 5 running backs? How do you rate those guys in a half PPR format?
So obviously we're going McCaffrey number 1. I like Zeke number 2. I think he's going to be a little more consistent from week to week. And then as he was, throughout his career, Saquon number 3, and then Kamara number 4. And then it starts getting a little weird because I think you want Cook in there number 5, but probably have Derrick Henry in there for now just because of the uncertainty with Dalvin.
Yeah, I think he's going to show up for what it's worth, Dalvin Cook. Under this new CBA, it seems like if he doesn't show up for the start of training camp, he's going to lose a year of eligibility. And then on top of that, teams cannot remove fines because you hear these big numbers being kicked around, like they're being fined $10,000 a day for not showing up. Teams used to remove those fines when the player actually showed up again.
Yeah.
And now they're not able to do that under the new CBA. So running backs have it, like I think they need to do something in the NFL in terms of rookie running back contracts because they're used and abused and then kind of thrown away. Dalvin Cook, unfortunately, has little leverage here, so I do think he's going to show up.
Yeah, I expect we will see him, but you never know. And yeah, I pick in the first round in general, early in fantasy drafts, the one thing you don't want to do is lose your draft. You don't want to make a risky decision. So I'm going to go ahead and take Derrick Henry, the guy who seems to get the ball at least 20 times every week, regardless of the opponent. This year, it's half PPR, so I feel a little better about it. In full PPR, sometimes you do hesitate with Henry. Even though Deion Lewis is gone, I still think they will find time to get somebody else on the field for a couple of those passing downs. But Derrick Henry is still a chance to be the number 1 or at least number 2 overall running back if he continues to play like he's played over the stretch runs of the last 2 seasons. So like the upside with Henry, and I don't think he's too risky either, even in a PPR format.
Yeah, he's someone. Yates, how are you feeling about Yates? Raybon, I know you're on the clock, but Yates, how are you feeling about Derrick Henry? Is he someone that you would consider over someone like Joe Mixon, or would you take him over Dalvin Cook right now?
I would personally be taking Mixon over Derrick Henry, but I get Chris's argument that you want safety in your first round pick, especially if you're not towards the top. So getting Henry, 300 carries easy is in the cards, and again, 12 plus rushing touchdowns is possible. So I get it there. But Chris, you've got 10 seconds left on the clock. Who are you going to go with here?
Where am I at? What is this? 2-1? All right.
206.
I'm going to go Tyreek. Give me Tyreek.
Okay.
Tyreek Hill.
Now, would you have taken Tyreek Hill over Julio Jones?
Yes. I like Tyreek Hill's upside this year because, listen, Julio is 6 straight seasons with at least 1,394 yards, top 7. But Tyreek Hill has Patrick Mahomes at quarterback. And at this point in their careers, Tyreek Hill entering his prime, Julio Jones kind of coming out of his prime, going into his, early 30s. I think that this is a monster season year for Hill. Julio's going to continue to do what he does. I don't think you can go wrong with any of the 2 through 5 guys, whatever your order. But I prefer Hill at number 2 over any other receiver except Michael Thomas.
Well, I don't mind you pairing him with someone like Derrick Henry, because obviously you've got the stability of Henry there, but then getting the upside with Tyreek Hill. He's someone that is definitely going to give you some rough weeks from time to time, but the upside could be week winning, when he does pop off. So I'm not opposed to Tyreek Hill. Obviously, he's my number 4 receiver. I would take Julio over him, but I would definitely take Tyreek Hill over someone like DeAndre Hopkins.
Who you have third? Adams?
I have Adams number 2, actually.
You know what's crazy with Adams? He's had 1,000-yard season in his career. And I'm not knocking him. It's just crazy to actually look up at his career game logs and say, oh my God, he has 1. And Julio does it. You could make a case for Julio at the 1-2, second as well.
For sure. And Yates, go ahead and talk about your pick, buddy. I know you're gonna brag about this one.
Yeah, this is one of my favorites. I grabbed Chris Godwin here at the 208. So we saw the wide receivers go off the board. We saw DeAndre Hopkins go at the 201, which was a little shocking to me, as the second one off the board behind Michael Thomas. And then you had Julio go, Tyreek. Am I missing Devontae Adams in there? Oh, Devontae Adams went at the 104, excuse me. So he went even before my pick at the 105. So Hopkins and then Julio, and then obviously Chris took Tyreek. So looking at Chris Godwin was kind of one of the last guys of these target monsters, right? These guys who we just have I am betting on pure target volume, and Chris Godwin has the talent to supersede that. So Chris Godwin here at the 208 to pair with Alvin Kamara, I think is a good start to a draft.
I would agree with you. I'm obviously not going to fault you for taking Chris Godwin there. My pick gets a little bit dicier. Now, Travis Kelce came off the board. George Kittle is here. And the reason that I'm going to go George Kittle is because it's like I'm getting a top 2 player at 2 different positions, right? I have Saquon Barkley, and then getting Kittle, who could arguably be the tight end 1 this year. And now that Deebo Samuel might start on the PUP list, I have no idea what's going to go on with him. But regardless, it's gonna be tough for Deebo Samuel to live up to expectations coming off foot surgery this offseason. So I believe this only benefits someone like George Kittle. So he's going to be my pick there at 211. When is the earliest you guys take a tight end? I mean, I've been actually taking tight end a lot when it gets to the back of the second round. Now, I'm not going to take them at the beginning of the second or anything like that, but do you guys have any issue with where I took Kittle there?
Nah, I think you could take a tight end. Here's the way I go about it. My kind of hierarchy, and it kind of goes back to what you said about wanting players at 2 different positions that are elite at least. Top 4 running backs, I want them off the board. Then I start thinking about receivers. So in the first round, and going into the second, I want as many of that top 5 at wide receiver as I can. If you have no top 5 running backs, no top 5 receivers on the board, wherever you are, whether it be late in the first, early in the second, mid-second, that's where I want. That's where I start thinking Kelce or Kittle. So it could happen actually at the turn, even in the 1-1. I do think you want that elite upside, but I'm not taking those guys over a top 5 receiver, because the elite receivers tend to outscore the top tight end every year if you look at the fantasy scoring per game.
All right. So, Yates, I'm on the clock here, and I know you're not going to give me any advice, but this is where I'm really, really torn. I believe there's a chunk of wide receivers in this range that I could definitely go with. I like Juju Smith-Schuster a lot, but he's not going to fall. I know running backs are going to be gone by the time it comes back to me. That's what makes me I'm doing a panic pick here, and I'm going to take Allen Robinson.
Dang it.
With the risk that he was basically that group of wide receivers. I'll talk about them in a moment. I don't want to give them all away, but I was worried, being I'm drafting on the turn basically down there. It's not going to be back to me until pick 411.
Yeah.
To take another running back there, I felt like my wide receiver 1 may have fallen in the range, if we're looking at someone like Cooper Kupp. I don't want Cooper Kupp as my wide receiver 1.
Right.
So to get Allen Robinson there, I feel like I got a top 10 wide receiver to pair with my top 2 running back, top 2 tight end.
Yeah, no, I really like that. Obviously, you heard my reaction, so I was kind of hoping that Robinson would fall to me at the 305. The other guy that I was hoping that would fall to me was Kenny Golladay, and he went off at the 304. So I'm sitting here at the 305. I have Kamara and I have Chris Godwin to start my team. So I can go either direction here. I think it's a little bit too early to be looking at Mark Andrews personally, who I think is the next tight end in line there. Mm-hmm. So looking at running back, Austin Ekeler is still on the board. Juju Smith-Schuster is still on the board at wide receiver. And then Todd Gurley is also still on the board at running back. I'm going to go with Austin Ekeler here, guys. I think that the offense isn't going to be as dynamic as what we saw last year, but obviously Ekeler was just fantastic last season, finishing as, I think, the RB6 off the top of my head. I'm looking it up. RB6, yeah. So I'm not projecting him to finish there, but I think that he has an extremely safe floor, and that's someone that I'd love to get at the 305 to pair with someone who has insane upside like Alvin Kamara.
Yeah, I've been going back and forth on Ekeler, and I'm curious to hear Chris's thoughts on him because, he's a guy I didn't really like. The offense is obviously trending in the wrong direction. He's going to lose some of that volume in the passing game, and that's very valuable to someone like Ekeler, who scored over 70% of his points on the through the air. Do you worry with Tyrod Taylor, Justin Herbert taking over at quarterback?
I worry more about the other pass catchers than I do about Ekeler. I think Ekeler, just based on what they want to do on offense, is still going to be a key cog, whether they're a little more run heavy. I don't think that he's going to catch like as many passes as he would have with Rivers, but because I don't think they'll be as pass heavy. But I do think he'll be involved, and I think Justin Jackson will get some carries as well as the backup. So I have no problem. I'm surprised Ekeler fell that far. That's a really good pick.
All right, so Chris, you're on the clock now with 20 seconds left, and we're getting to the point where these RB1s are pretty much almost gone.
Yeah.
Pulling up the draft board, we can see that you have Derrick Henry and Tyreek Hill. Do you feel confident? Do you want to go with Mark Andrews, or do you say, you know what, I'm waiting at tight end?
Yeah, I think I want Mark Andrews here. Where is that? There we go. Yeah, I want Mark Andrews here, and the reason being, I think Ekeler was the last running back in a tier. I don't feel great about Leonard Fournette this year. I think he's going to see less work in the passing game with Chris Thompson there. That was an underrated signing, a guy who's been with new offensive coordinator Jay Gruden for a while in Washington as well. And Fournette hasn't been that great on the ground. We know they were trying to trade him. And then Gurley really worries me. I think he's a big risk to take in the third round. So give me another, what I think is an elite player targeted on 33% of his routes in Mark Andrews, and he only ran about 60% of the route. So he could be a full-time guy this year. He could absolutely finish as the number one tight end. So love Andrews here.
Yeah. No, and with Hayden Hurst out of the way, it's going to clear up some targets for him.
Yeah.
I know it's not a whole lot, but it does clear up some, and it's not like they run a whole lot. They're not, I don't know. It's difficult to say that those targets are going to go to Nick Boyle, right?
It's the guys who get targets are the guys who are good. Like, look at their targets per route. Mark Andrews, 1 out of every 3 routes. That is more than anyone. That's more than Julio Jones. That's more than Travis Kelce. That's more than anyone. And Mark Andrews doesn't even play all the routes these first 2 years. He plays anything like, let's say, 75, 80%. He runs a route per dropback. He could explode and put up just redonkulous numbers.
For sure. And Chris, you have 15 seconds just so you know. Yates, is this the area of the draft where you start taking your guys where you don't necessarily care about ADP so much? Because some people want to argue with us, on Twitter, wherever it may be, and say, hey, why do you guys even care about ADP? It all comes back to value. It's not to say that your ranking should be based off ADP,
right,
but to understand where players are going in what range and not having to reach for them. Just because you like someone like, Terry McLaurin, it doesn't mean you need to reach for him in the third round. You know what I mean?
No, completely. Yeah, that's the benefit of having both ADP and your rankings side by side, is to be able to say that looking at ADP and looking at the guy that I have at wide receiver 10, for example, I can look at him and say, I don't need to draft him in the second round, even though he might be the 10th wide receiver off the board. I don't need to draft him there. I can get value. I can get another solid piece for my roster, in the second round, and then I can come back and get him 2 rounds later, which is exactly what I'm going to do here with Calvin Ridley. So I'm going to draft Calvin Ridley here, and I was crossing my fingers and praying that he fell to me. So I do want to double back, though. I will make that selection here, but I'm going to run down this clock because I want to talk to Chris. Chris, you drafted Cooper Kupp.
Yep.
And so I want to hear your thoughts here on Cooper Kupp. Obviously, I don't think he has the high ceiling, and maybe you disagree. I don't think he has as high of a ceiling as he did throughout the first half of last year. What are you seeing here with Cooper Kupp, getting him here at the 406?
I think he has a very high ceiling. I think he should actually be right around that top 10 at wide receiver, because you look at what the Rams are doing, and they let Brandon Cooks go. Jared Goff has a lot of trouble going down the football field. Him and Kupp are very good friends, and Kupp has gotten better pretty much each year. He came back off the injury last year and was even more productive. I think that he's going to continue to be a top target for the Rams, who, by the way, threw a ton last year and may continue to do so given their running back situation. Cooper Kupp scored the 4th most half PPR points last year. I mean, to get a guy like that in the 4th round, and I'm going to do it every time. I think he is the Rams' number 1 receiver in Jared Goff's mind. I think Robert Woods is also getting undervalued. So I like both of those guys a lot. I think they fall too far in many drafts, actually.
Sure. Tags, do you agree there?
Part of me does, but part of me does worry about it because they did start moving to more 2 tight end sets. They weren't running as many 3 wide sets. So it's Cooper Kupp. He's slot only, essentially. You don't want him playing on the perimeter. But at the same time, you get your best players the ball. And over the course of his career, Cooper Kupp, Jared Goff, I should say, has been better when targeting Cooper Kupp than any other wide receiver on that team. So I think Sean McVay's smart enough to understand that. There has been a divide on Cooper Kupp this offseason where there's guys that saying that he's completely off their board because of what happened towards the end of last season. And then there's some like Chris who are saying, hey, let's not forget what this guy did over the first year and a half of his career. So I understand both sides of the argument, but what I'm going to do is I'm going to say that I have Cooper Kupp ranked as my number 17 wide receiver. So I'm not anti-Kupp. I'm not going to go out on a limb and say that he's going to finish as a top 12 wide receiver like Chris, but I do understand the argument because he is probably the best receiver on that team. Robert Woods is solid, but in terms of actual football players and what they bring to the table, they need Goff to be targeting Cooper Kupp because if Kupp is off the field, Jared Goff is going to continue to struggle.
By the way, what he did at the end of last season was close out the year with a touchdown in 5 straight games.
Yeah, it's really interesting with Kupp too. Like super quick, like he did that, but then he was also the wide receiver like 31 throughout that time frame.
The yardage wasn't there, but I mean that's kind of variance. It's when you're looking at game logs, and I think people should do this because fantasy is not only about your year-long projection and production. It is about what you do on a week-to-week basis. But sometimes you can look at game logs and get too caught up in like the order of things and what's going on, and it's recency bias. It's at the end of the day, again, this guy finished with the 4th most points at wide receiver. You're going to see these fluctuations in pretty much every player you're drafting outside of Michael Thomas and Christian McCaffrey and those guys maybe. So don't get too caught up in that.
Yeah, the benefit is that you're getting him at a discount, right? That's baked into his ADP and his ECR right now. So, all right, Tags, you got 10 seconds left on your pick. So Calvin Ridley I took him at the 408. We'll double back. You took Jonathan Taylor at the 411. Who are you going at the 502?
I'm excited about both these picks, honestly. Both these guys have I could see both of these players that I just drafted going in the 1st round next year. I really can see it. There's a path to where it can happen. Jonathan Taylor, obviously playing behind a top 3 offensive line in Indianapolis. Phillip Rivers there. I understand that people are talking about Nyheim Hines. I'm not one of them. I am anti-Nyheim Hines, as a matter of fact, in terms of what he's actually going to do. The coaching staff is the exact same. They were running low on running backs last year. They had bad health. They went to Jonathan Williams to give touches rather than Nyheim Hines. Not that he's a horrible football player, but he's a guy that's going to get 3 to 6 targets per game. He's going to get a couple carries. Not excited. Jonathan Taylor, on the other hand, is Nick Chubb light, basically. Nick Chubb is not a guy that's going to get targeted a whole lot in the passing game, but he is excellent on those first couple downs. Jonathan Taylor has proven to handle that workhorse load. They don't draft him in the 2nd round if they believe in Marlon Mack. I'm psyched about that one. And then DK Metcalf at 502. I took him over Terry McLaurin, and I had McLaurin ranked 1 spot higher, but this came down to, what am I chasing here? I want a guy that has a top 10 ceiling. Yep. Terry McLaurin does not because of the offense that he plays in. DK Metcalf can be that guy. I love DK. If you get him as a low-end wide receiver 2 on your fantasy team this year, or even a high-end wide receiver 3, I think you should be absolutely stoked because the sky's the limit for this kid.
Yeah, all right. Well, I am up here at the 505. I'm going to take Devontae Parker, guys, which I have actually, up to this point in mock drafts this offseason, I've not taken Devontae Parker anywhere. So, but I'm going to roll the dice here. I'm going to take him, and I'm going to see what it looks like for my team when we're all done. And I've got Alvin Kamara, Austin Ekeler at running back right now, and then Chris Godwin, Calvin Ridley, and Devontae Parker. So these are 3 guys. If I can get Parker as my wide receiver 3, I think that's a really good spot where I don't necessarily need to rely on him. I can rotate in based on, but we also do have the flex spots to think about. So, but I think I can safely plug him in. He has a high ceiling, and you're talking about not much change with those targets. You still have Preston Williams coming back, sure, but then Albert Wilson, he's not going to be someone who demands a ton of targets. A lot didn't change from last year is what I'm trying to say. So.
Yates, so while Raybon contemplates his pick here, I want to ask you, who do you prefer? So if you're a Devontae Parker owner in Dynasty and Redraft, whatever, who do you prefer to be the quarterback week 1?
I think Fitzpatrick week 1.
Yep.
I think that Tua. Well, I think that it's a mixture of like what I actually want and then what I think is going to happen. I think Tua is going to start the season on the pup. I just think with no preseason, you don't roll out a rookie quarterback with injury concerns week 1. So Fitzpatrick's going to be there. And if that's the case, we've seen chemistry between him and Fitzpatrick.
I love that. And that's where I wanted to go with it, because I think a lot of people out there are going to be questioning that same exact thing. And I am all about Fitzpatrick. You have a proven veteran, one that loves to target Devontae Parker. And by the way, Preston Williams, a lot of targets that he had last year were coming when Josh Rosen was actually the quarterback. I don't think many people realize that Devontae Parker did much better with Ryan Fitzpatrick out there. So definitely want Fitzpatrick out there if I'm a Devontae Parker backer.
Sure. All right, well, we saw Chris take the David Johnson at the 507. So, Chris, let's talk through this. David Johnson is someone who people are completely split on this offseason, where obviously you like him. You're drafting him here at the 507. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, and this is a positional scarcity pick more than anything. And here's what happens. I think a lot of times in drafts, at some point, you're going to have to make a pick based on positional scarcity. And by that, I mean running back. And so a lot of people end up doing it either late in the first when I think there are better receivers on the board, or sometime maybe in the third when you kind of mentioned there's a tier drop off at running back. I didn't want to do that. I feel good about my team. So Johnson is a guy where I look up at wide receiver. I know I need a couple more of those guys, but they're going to be more wide receivers that are kind of in the same tier in these next couple of rounds. Whereas Johnson is a guy who, on any other team, I may be a little more worried, but in Houston, we've seen Bill O'Brien and his kind of habits with using these veteran running backs. Lamar Miller, Carlos Hyde. He'll give them about 15 to 17 touches per game, and they wouldn't have traded for Johnson if they didn't kind of want to do that. So I don't feel great about him as a player. I think he's not the same guy he used to be, but I do like him in Houston as a solid RB2.
Sure. All right, well, yeah, to prove your point, we saw a ton of running backs go off in between your David Johnson pick and then who you took at the 606. So we saw Mark Ingram go off the board, Raheem Mostert at the 510, Cam Akers, and then, your pick at the 606, you ended up taking Jarvis Landry here. So I think this is a great value for Landry, who has done nothing but produce his entire NFL career, yet he still is consistently down in ADP and ECR. That stands for expert consensus ranking. So you get him here at the 606, Chris. I think this is a great pick.
Yeah, I think Landry, people are down on him, maybe because of the kind of name value. I think Jarvis Landry's never been a sexy pick. I also know he's a little bit banged up going. He had some offseason surgery, but he looks like he's going to be healthy. And let's remember, with the same amount of usage last season, playing same amount of routes, snaps, all that good stuff, Jarvis Landry outproduced Odell Beckham. So to get Landry, 3 rounds later than Beckham, 4 rounds later than Beckham, yeah, I'm going to take that all day.
Yeah, listen to this. So 2017, Landry was the wide receiver 7. 2018, wide receiver 19. 2019, wide receiver 13. And I think he's somewhere in like the 30s in ECR. Like, just people are completely off of him. I think this is a great pick. Oh, I'm on the clock. I am taking DeAndre Swift here. I completely forgot that I was on the clock.
Fun fact before we move on from Jarvis Landry,
yeah.
there are 3 wide receivers, just 3, who have been top 24 wide receivers in each of the last 5 seasons. It's Julio Jones, Mike Evans, and Jarvis Landry.
That's crazy.
People don't like the unsexy picks at wide receiver sometimes. Like, I feel like Cooper Kupp and Jarvis Landry are not very sexy. Like, you don't think of them like juking guys out of their shoes or doing something that kind of we'll get on Instagram on a little clip. But
sure.
You know what they do? They score you fantasy points and win you leagues.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah, and especially here at the 606 where you're pairing him with an already well-built roster. So I ended up at the 608. I took DeAndre Swift. That's who I was planning on taking because I needed another running back to build along what Chris was saying with his David Johnson pick. Looking at the running back options, it starts to get a little slim here. Slim pickings with guys like Darius Geis is already up, Damian Williams, Ronald Jones, James White, Matt Breida. All these guys come with huge question marks about their fantasy output. However, I know that DeAndre Swift, while I don't think he has an insane ceiling this season, I think he's going to be a safe option. So for me to pair him with Alvin Kamara and Austin Ekeler at the running back position, I feel like is a great pick before we experience a little bit of a drop-off. Tags, do you agree?
I do. I was looking at the running backs, and he was one of those last guys that I was thinking about there, because this is the point. I think this is where you could almost stop to care about ADP. Like, you almost don't even need to pay attention to it, because this is where people are going to start reaching for their guys. But again, he was one of the last running backs that could have that starting job. So I definitely agree with you there.
All right, well, you ended up taking Tyler Boyd at the 6'11". So, Tags, what are you seeing there with Tyler Boyd? Obviously, you know I like him, but how does he fit along with your roster so far?
You know, I like Tyler Boyd. He offered some stability. Having Saquon and Jonathan Taylor, Jonathan Taylor is the semi-risky one, I guess you could say, just because there is some unknown there with him being a rookie. Allen Robinson, target hog. DK Metcalf projecting a bump, but even if he doesn't get a bump in targets, he's a guy that produced wide receiver 2 numbers basically once he was fully established as a starting wide receiver, moving all over the place. Tyler Boyd, if AJ Green were to get hurt or anything like that, Tyler Boyd is looking at a top 24 season without question. Right now, I think he's a sturdy wide receiver 3. He's kind of like a cheaper Cooper Kupp in a way. And then I have George Kittle. Obviously, I'm pretty stoked about my roster right now. I don't feel there's a weakness, and it allows me to go in a lot of different places with this pick, where if I want to take an upside pick like a Marquis Brown, I could do that, but I only have 2 running backs in my roster, which gets really dicey if I want to pass. So I'm going to take someone that we talked about on this podcast a few times, and Kareem Hunt.
Yep.
And the fact that we do believe he offers flex value with Nick Chubb obviously in the lineup. This is a team that clearly wants to run the ball based on all the moves they've made this offseason. But if something were to happen to Nick Chubb, Kareem Hunt is a legitimate top 5 every single week starter. You just plug him in, set it, forget it. Doesn't even matter the opponent. So getting him in the 7th round, I feel pretty good about that.
Yeah, I want to talk about this really quick. So Kareem Hunt, I am more willing this year than ever before to take these guys who are kind of these backups. They kind of teeter on the edge of standalone fantasy value, where I think, an option that you could have gone with, Tags, is to take a Jordan Howard, for example, right? Or someone like that, where you know that he's a safe pick. He's going to get his carries in Miami. But yeah, I don't think he offers you top 10 upside. But this year more than ever, with injury concerns, no preseason players are going to be ramping up significantly, pretty quickly. The potential that if a player contracts COVID-19, they're quarantined for 2 to 3 weeks, you miss 2 to 3 games. I'm more willing than ever before to take these guys in these mid rounds who are going to be league winners. That if something happens to Nick Chubb, Kareem Hunt's a league winner completely. Yep. Chris, what do you think about that? Do you think that that's a strategy that people should be looking at this year, rather than taking someone like James White, who's in this range?
I do. I think that's generally my strategy across all leagues. A lot of people apply it only to best ball, but I do think you should be thinking upside, at least elite upside. Because remember, in a 12-team league, you have to be essentially in the 93rd percentile. You make up 8% of the league. You want players that can finish in the top 10% of their fantasy, of their position. So I am with it. I try not to get into a position where I want to draft a running back in this spot, though. There are some guys I have my eye on. We'll see if they drop. But I'm still not going to go running back here up at the 707.
707.
Yeah, so what I'm going to do, and you guys kind of alluded to it, but I want upside here. And you mentioned Marquis Brown, and he's on my radar, but there's a guy with a really good quarterback who's going to be, I think, the number 1 receiver for his team. All he has to do is stay healthy. He's never done it, so this is the question here. But Will Fuller, if he stays healthy, he has legitimate top 5 upside. Because you're talking about Deshaun Watson. You're talking about a guy who goes deep down the field. You're talking about a guy who's averaged 4.5 catches per game, even with Hopkins there these last couple of years. It just comes down to the health to me with Will Fuller. So I love him after I have my starting receivers already kind of locked up. To get Will Fuller as that number 4 guy is always something I'm looking to do in draft.
Yeah, I mean, Will Fuller and Brandon Cooks, they went back-to-back at 706 and 707. I'm really torn in my rankings. I have them right next to each other at 30 and 31. One of them is going to be a tremendous value. I mean, Brandon Cooks has been doing it with no matter what quarterback he goes to. Now goes to Deshaun Watson. Hard to argue it's much of a downgrade for him. The concussions are obviously a concern. They're an issue, but they're an issue for every single player out there. But Will Fuller, it's been a lot of different injuries that have added up over time. He's going into a contract year. I don't know which one. So Yates, I don't know if you and I have talked about them too. Obviously, it sounds like, Chris, you prefer Will Fuller. Which one would you pick of these two, Yates?
I mean, I'm really at I'm not doing this intentionally. I'm really at a 50-50 split right now on these two guys because I just don't know. Will Fuller comes with his own concerns of, he's rarely on the field, but when he is, he's dynamic and he can win you a matchup single-handedly. Brandon Cooks has his own concerns with concussions, and then we've talked about that previously too, where I actually feel like that's a little bit overblown. So, he's adjusting to a new offense. You have to factor in everything, guys. I'm really just kind of split down the middle on these two guys.
I think
they're both active.
Oh, sorry, Ted.
If they're both active, I think we have to say Fuller, but it's Fuller that I have, I think, even more question marks about.
Yeah, I don't think you want to rely on him as a starter or so-called starter on your team. But the thing is, Fuller has the chemistry with Watson. Fuller's been there. We've seen Fuller put up elite numbers. Like even last year, I think he had a 200-yard, 3-touchdown game. And a big thing with Fuller, his median percentage of routes run per game, even last year, was 95%. So he's going to be on the field every snap when he is healthy. Mm-hmm. He'll probably leave a couple games or get hurt. But if you're talking upside, he could play every snap and improve on 4.5 catches per game. To me, that's a little different than Cooks, who has gone from team to team. Now there's been no offseason. And he wasn't that great last year for whatever reason. It had a lot to do with Goff, I think, but Fuller was still, I think, a little bit better of a player if you just watch the two play and look at their numbers last year.
Yeah. All right. Hey, before we keep going, I want to take just a quick second here to make sure that people know about our new podcast. No, it's not the baseball podcast. No, it's not Game Changers. Those are both amazing podcasts, but this one is for our betting audience. The new podcast is called The Daily Juice, and our first episode will be coming out later on this week. Our team has been putting a lot of work into this one, and I know it's going to be awesome. So make sure to check that out at bettingpros.com/dailyjuice. All right, guys, at the 808, I went with Josh Allen, and we didn't get to talk about my previous pick, but I went with J.K. Dobbins, and that was building off at the 705, and that was building off of that same kind of concept of what we were talking about with Kareem Hunt, where if something happens to Mark Ingram, you're talking about J.K. Dobbins receiving the majority of the touches in the league's most dynamic offense as far as the run game. So, and I think that he teeters on having standalone fantasy value. So for someone who I can get at the 705 to be a flex player or to just sit on my bench if he doesn't get the touches that I'm anticipating right away and I can roll in someone else, I feel like that's a really smart pick. And then I did double it up with 808 Josh Allen. I needed to fill out the quarterback spot, and typically I'm not looking to fill out the quarterback position on my roster until later on. Josh Allen, though, you're talking about rushing upside and just what he brings to the table. You now add in Stephon Diggs. I really like adding Allen here at the 808.
Yep. No, and I think so, Chris, I will let you talk about Jordan Howard. I know you picked him. Are you excited about him, or is this more of again, you needed to fill some position scarcity?
So it's both. First of all, I think running backs that once you get into these rounds, it's about 6, 7 through 10, you're always looking to fill out your depth chart because you're going to need running backs. They average about one more missed game per year than the other positions. So yes, it's that, but I do think Howard and Matt Breida, for that matter, are getting underrated. The Dolphins completely revamped their running back room. They fired their offensive coordinator and brought in Shane Gailey. We saw a kind of split in with him with the Jets, where it was Matt Forte, and then it was Bilal Powell. And Forte would get 15 to 17 touches. Powell would still get 8 to 10, if not more. So I think both of the Miami running backs are going to have value based on their ADPs. I think I would have considered Howard probably around earlier. But again, that goes back to ADP and knowing where these guys are likely to fall.
For sure. I debated taking Ronald Jones the last time I was on the clock, but I didn't want to mention it because the pick predictor, it's one of these features that we have in here. It basically tells you what's the percent chance that they believe the player that you want is going to be gone by the time it gets to your next pick. And Ronald Jones had said there was a 41% chance, so I'm fortunate that he fell back to me with this pick. Unfortunately, the next player I wanted was CeeDee Lamb. He came off the board right before my pick, so I'm going to go with the alternate pick here, and it might be the better one to begin with, and that's Christian Kirk. Christian Kirk is a guy that people were excited about last year, and now for whatever reason they've fallen off. Now I understand DeAndre Hopkins is there on the team, but again, we haven't had an offseason. He doesn't know the offense as well as Christian Kirk does. He doesn't have any chemistry with someone like Kyler Murray just yet. So Christian Kirk could be a bit undervalued this year. Again, I think he's best suited as like a back-end wide receiver 3, wide receiver 4, and that's precisely where I have him. I have him to back up Allen Robinson, DK Metcalf, and Tyler Boyd. So if for whatever reason Boyd struggles, Metcalf struggles, whatever, I do have someone like Christian Kirk who, when on the field, he's been solid. I'm not excited about this pick necessarily, but I think it's a solid pick, where I got him in the 9th round.
Yeah, for sure. All right, well, I am on the clock, 9:05, and so far my roster is Josh Allen, Alvin Kamara, Austin Ekeler, Chris Godwin, Calvin Ridley, Devontae Parker. And then for my flex spots, I've got DeAndre Swift and J.K. Dobbins. So I'm not in love with any of the running backs that are available right now. Keyshawn Vaughn is someone who I'm eyeing in tags, that I like him, but I think I can wait and still get him to fall. I am going to go with a little bit further down the draft board here. I'm going to go with Anthony Miller. And I'm going to go with Miller here because he is, in this Chicago offense, you're talking about really only 2 main targets. You have Allen Robinson and you have Anthony Miller. Besides that, Ted Ginn, Riley Ridley, Darnell Mooney. Like, those guys are not going to be taking away significant targets away from these main options of Allen Robinson and Anthony Miller. So I think Anthony Miller could see over 100 targets this season easy. And we've seen that he, in his rookie season in 2018, he put up 7 touchdowns on only 54 targets. So he has the talent. He's an extremely talented player. We saw his reception totals go up last year. The touchdowns, of course, went down with the offense. But he's someone who, if everything clicks right for him, and he's my bench player, right? He's my first bench player here, so I don't need to rely on him. If he does hit, then I've got a solid player.
Yeah, no, I mean, I dig that pick. He's someone that actually, going by the pick predictor, it was saying that there was only a 1% chance that he would make it back to my next pick, whereas someone like Keyshawn Vaughn was saying 18%. So I think you chose correctly there, even though it's probably likely that Keyshawn Vaughn's going to go before yours.
Yep.
Definitely like Anthony Miller, and I think it does help that he's got 2 quarterback options now, whether it be Foles or Trubisky, it doesn't matter. The fact that he's got a better chance of having a successful quarterback, because if one's playing bad, that means the other one's going to get some playing time.
Right.
And Miller was a touchdown scorer at Memphis, so I don't think that there should be any reason to doubt that moving forward. I like him quite a bit. What's your take on him, Raybon?
Yeah, he's a guy that I think I do have questions, because he started off real slow last year, but at the same time we did hear that he had kind of some issues in preparation. I think there were kind of some comments made by the OC, so he's a tough guy to peg for me. Like, there are guys I would take over him in that range for upside, like McCole Hardman and Henry Ruggs if they're there, maybe even a Sammy Watkins. But when you're in that range, I think he's a guy that, based on the way he finished last year, does have some upside as well to be that number 2 target for the Bears.
All right, well, Chris, you drafted James White at the 9:07. You're back on the clock at the 10:06. Who are you going with here?
So now is when I think wide receivers starting to thin out a little bit. I am going to still let's go Crowder here. I can't. Did I time out?
I think you timed out. It looks like Carson Wentz went on.
It may have. Now, so let me see. Is there? I can pause this. So is there someone else that you'd like to pick instead of Carson Wentz?
Yeah,
there?
I was gonna go Jamison Crowder there.
All right, let me see.
I pressed the button.
I believe I have the ability to switch that out.
Okay, thanks.
No, it's cool. It's just another feature that we're showing off, that we can go back and change this. I believe it did. Let me see. Let me make sure. It's still showing me Carson Wentz, but let me go back here.
Yeah, so I still, based on the quarterbacks on the board at this spot, I have Derrick Henry, David Johnson, Jordan Howard, James White at running back, so I feel pretty good about my running back depth at that point. I think White fell way too long, especially since Sony Michel is not healthy. James White is going, and we've seen James White actually put up, those top 5 kind of running back numbers in the past, even though we don't think of him as that kind of player. Then at wide receiver, I have Tyreek Hill, Cooper Kupp, Jarvis Landry, and Will Fuller. So I have a pretty solid wide receiver depth chart. There's a couple more guys that I have my eye on that I feel like will be around next round as well. But Crowder is a guy who's still going to be the Jets' number 1 receiver, at least in terms of target share, I think.
Right.
Now, in a best ball league, Crowder is not someone I target. In a best ball league, I target a guy like Denzel Mims in like the 17th round. But
Sure.
in a regular draft, we were talking about starting guys every week and making a lineup and needing that weekly predictability. I love Crowder's floor, and he does have some upside. Played significantly better with Sam Darnold than in those games Darnold missed, and started the year, first game as a Jet actually, with 14 catches.
All right, so it's for whatever reason it's not allowing me to change the pick. And now fortunately you did not have a quarterback, am I correct?
Yeah, we can go at Carson Wentz there, though. I would have probably I usually wait and go with either a Daniel Jones or a Joe Burrow. Those are my 2 late round targets.
I love the Burrow, man. Like he's somebody that in the Scott Fish Bowl that we're obviously all taking part in. He's someone that I definitely want on my roster. But I like the upside picks there because Daniel Jones actually had a lot of upside last year. It was kind of up and down, but at the same time, if that's what you're looking for and your Hail Mary's a quarterback, it's not a bad play to make.
Yeah, especially when you factor in now that he'll have all of his weapons healthy and that he carries, great rushing ability. So he picks up those easy yards on the ground. Okay, so we did end up going with Carson Wentz there for Chris at the 10:06. But then, guys, Robbie Anderson went off the board at the 10:07, who I was eyeing. I really wanted him to fall to me because he's someone who I think is just going to be insanely targeted this season in Carolina. I don't think the touchdown totals are necessarily going to be there, but Robbie Anderson is going to see as many targets as he can handle behind DJ Moore. So he's someone who I really like. I like that pick there by the team in front of me. I'm looking at the draft board right now. Jamison Crowder is still there, obviously, but then there's a guy a little bit further down, and I'm going to go back-to-back Bears here. I'm going to take Tariq Cohen, who I think is just criminally undervalued and underrated at RB41. In ADP and ECR, RB41 in ECR. That's just way too low for me. He was incredibly inefficient last year, but when you go back and you watch the film, Trubisky just wasn't giving him the opportunity to create in space. Everything was just kind of quick catches at the sideline, really wasn't the opportunity to be able to create. We know how electric he is. He put up insane numbers back in 2018. And so if this offense can get back on track, which I am projecting that to be, again, the RB13 in 2018, guys, and I'm getting him here in the 10th round to be a bench running back again. I like it.
I love Tariq Cohen there. He's an easy buy if you're going the late round running back strategy. And by the way, that's one of the features we do have now inside of the Draft Wizard. You can actually go to draft strategy. It's on the settings. If you're watching on YouTube, you can see there's a little settings tab. You have 0 running back, 0 wide receiver, late round quarterback, streaming tight end, and streaming defense, which are extremely helpful if you aren't used to those strategies. It'll actually recommend you picks based on what you want to try out. And that's where you obviously practice these things in mock drafts. Getting back to my pick here, Latavius Murray is someone that I definitely like having on my roster. He's kind of like a Kareem Hunt in the aspect that I believe he's going to have flex value sometimes, not as much value as someone like Kareem Hunt, and that's why he's going a couple rounds later. But again, league-winning upside. We saw it when Alvin Kamara went down last year. Even though the run game struggled a little bit, Latavius Murray was the RB1 in fantasy football for the 2 weeks that Alvin Kamara was out. So getting him on my bench, I am pretty stoked about at the end of the 10th round. And the wide receiver I wanted, I knew would be on the board when it came back as the pick predictor. Again, it told me there was like a 2% chance that he'd be gone. I am going to go with Jalen Reagor. I'm doing this because the more we hear about Alshon Jeffrey, the more you want to just kind of run from him. Because I thought Alshon Jeffrey was going to be a value because I thought he'd be ready for the start of the season. Rumors are that he's not going to be ready, that they haven't heard any good things about him. He's obviously aging. There's talks that they could cut him, eat up the cap hit over the next 2 years with the new CBA. Jalen Reagor's a guy that can play all over the field. I like Deshaun Jackson quite a bit, but on my bench, I'll take someone like Jalen Reagor on the upside that he presents.
All right, well, we saw quite a few running backs go off. Obviously, Tags took Latavius Murray there at the 10:11, but then Darrell Henderson at the 10:12, Alexander Madison at the 11:01, and then we saw Sammy Watkins and Preston Williams go off the board after his Jalen Reagor pick. So I'm back on the clock here, and guys, I'm not going to play around. Even though the experts are telling me to take Rob Gronkowski, there's still a few other tight ends that we're looking at, like Austin Hooper, Mike Gesicki, Noah Fant, in between who I'm eyeing. I'm not going to play around. Tags mentioned this is kind of the range where you take your guys. And I think that Jonnu Smith is a player. Obviously, I've talked a lot about him. My feelings on him are quite clear. I think he's in for a huge workload this season. He has the talent to be a dominant force in the NFL, and I think he's going to be he's going to drastically outproduce his tight end 16 ECR right now, and where I'm getting him here in the 11th round. So I still haven't filled out the tight end spot on my roster, so I want to make sure that I do that, and I'm just not going to play around.
Yeah, we do know that some teams take 2 tight ends, and you could have looked at the draft board like we have it color coded. If you again through this mock draft tool, that you can see every tight end outside of Team 9 has a tight end, and Yates didn't want to take the chance that they would take Jonnu Smith over, and obviously, and with their pick they just took Rob Gronkowski, so they clearly wanted a tight end. So it could have been Jonnu Smith. It just all depends. But either way, I appreciate you going after your guy there.
Yeah, for sure. Well, Chris, you took one of the guys that I was definitely eyeing if he fell back another round. That was Tony Pollard in the 11th round there. Talk about Tony Pollard, and then you doubled it up with Deshaun Jackson there, which I am not happy with you about. I really wanted Deshaun Jackson right there. So let's talk about those 2 players really quick.
Tony Pollard is getting a guy like Kareem Hunt 5 rounds later.
Yep.
It's getting a guy who this year at least may have standalone flex value. They're talking about playing him more in the slot. Remember, they lost 2 middle of the field targets in Randall Cobb and Jason Witten. They do have CeeDee Lamb, but I do think Pollard played well enough to get an increase in role. And just how well did Pollard play? Well, he broke 26 tackles on just 101 touches, led all running backs in Pro Football Focus's elusive rating, broke about half as many tackles on Zeke on about a third or fourth of the workload. So that's to give you a picture of how good he was. And if Zeke goes down, he's a league winner. Anytime Zeke is out, he's going to push for 20 touches. And then Deshaun Jackson, at this point in the draft at wide receiver, I'm going for guys who can either lead their team or push for their team lead in targets or air yards that are still on the board. And Jackson, I project him to lead the Eagles in air yards. And I think he's going off the board way too late based on recency bias because he only played 3 games last year. But the word out of camp is that he's the guy that they're already planning to feature as their number 1 receiver. And so I actually have Jackson over Rager. I get there's an age difference, but I still think, in the brief time we saw Jackson last year, he's shown that he has enough left. He's aging kind of gracefully, probably because he doesn't take hits. He just catches the ball deep and either scores or goes out of bounds, one way or another. But if he does get hit, he'll probably break. So that's why he's going this way.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I love the pick because I'm right there with you as far as him projecting him. Tags, if you could go back, would you still take Jalen Reagor at that spot, or would you take Deshaun Jackson?
No, I'll take Reagor. He's a bench receiver, whereas Deshaun Jackson's not a guy. I mean, he's going to deliver a lot of wide receiver 3 weeks. I truly believe that, but I think Reagor is the guy that could turn into an every week starter for me, especially with knowing this Alshon Jeffrey bit. It's really difficult. I'm moving him up my board more and more, and I finally got to the point where I moved him past Deshaun Jackson because Deshaun Jackson is still a value, and I love the pick there because I think that both of them are going to offer value in fantasy leagues. It's just Reagor, I think, has the higher upside of the 2.
Sure. All right, well, I went Duke Johnson at the 1208.
And ticked me off in the process.
Looking at my roster, I'm apparently turning into RBU here. So I've got a ton of running backs on my roster, but I like Duke Johnson, especially at the 1208. We're talking about the back of the 12th round. If he doesn't turn out, if he isn't the pass catcher there, if it is all David Johnson and Duke Johnson goes back to a completely just backup role, then I can cut him. It's not a heavy draft capital investment. So I'll take Duke Johnson there. Tags, you're on the clock here at the 1211. Who'd you end up going with?
Yep, I'm going Paris Campbell. There again, a bench littered with upside. That's what I want, and I'm taking a second-year player that a lot of people loved, and people said that he's T.Y. Hilton's eventual replacement. He's bigger and he's faster than T.Y. Hilton, and Hilton now on the wrong side of 30 years old, starting with a new quarterback. It's very possible that Paris Campbell becomes a favorite of Phillip Rivers in the slot, which is where they're gonna play him this year. Love that pick there in the 12th round, and then I'm going to snag my quarterback here because I know that some teams are going to start taking backup quarterbacks. So I'm going to snag Tom Brady. I have him ranked as my number 10 quarterback, if I'm not mistaken. I was very, I'm trying to figure out. I was trying to be not generous to Tom Brady when it came to my projections because obviously age is catching up to you and this and that. But if you start looking at the wide receivers and the roles they play and how the offense has to move, and and knowing that they're the best receivers that he's ever thrown to, it's really difficult for me to say that Tom Brady doesn't hit his projected marks in terms of Vegas over-unders and things like that. You don't sign Tom Brady and then ask him to hand the ball off, 35 times per game. They don't even have the running backs to do that. So Tom Brady this late, I don't think he's a guy that's going to win you a fantasy title, but I think that he's going to be a Drew Brees type quarterback, and the fact that you could rely on him for low-end QB1 production more often than not.
All right, well, I am on the clock here at the 13:05. I've kind of backed myself into a corner. I need wide receiver because I'm a little shallow there with how many running backs I've taken, but I'm not in love with any of the options here. So I'm looking at guys like Curtis Samuel, N'Keal Harry, and Hunter Renfrow are the top 3 guys on the board. I really like Hunter Renfrow, the player. Now we're just talking about a lot more mouths to feed there in that offense. So I don't think he sees the target totals that he did last year. I'm going to go with Curtis Samuel here. I don't think that he's someone who I can necessarily rely on, week 1. But if something does happen to DJ Moore, Robbie Anderson, if I didn't get the projections right and and Curtis Samuel is the number 2 there instead of Robbie Anderson, then great. I've got a weapon here that I can plug into my lineup on bye weeks and stuff like that. But otherwise, just kind of looking at the board there, I didn't really want to take N'Keal Harry. That's really all it came down to.
I'm kind of with you, even though I do think that Cam Newton helps N'Keal Harry a little bit in terms of a guy that's willing to throw it up to him in one-on-one situations. Yeah. I think it helps, but Curtis Samuel, he had so much opportunity last year that he did nothing with, and I know the quarterback play was terrible. But do we forgive him, or do we say, they already kind of moved on by signing Robbie Anderson? How do we feel about Curtis Samuel this year?
Yeah, I'm in that boat. I'm kind of just like, if it happens, it happens. If it doesn't, then I can easily move on. Because we're going to see guys pop up on the waiver wire
for sure.
A lot more this year than ever before. So, Curtis Samuel can be that guy. If it looks a lot different than what I projected in my projections, then great. If not, then I can move on. Chris, you ended up taking Austin Hooper here at the 13:07. What are you seeing with Austin Hooper? Was he kind of a guy that you were targeting, or was he just kind of the best player left on the board?
Yeah, so at this spot, and this is why I timed out and took Wentz, I would have rather waited because Daniel Jones, or guys like that. Yeah, Daniel Jones is on the board. I would have rather gone with another wide receiver, but the way I look at it, you just want guys who are going to get the targets, right, at this point. And so 2 flex, I can start Hooper if I need to. I do think he'll get more targets than a lot of these other receivers left on the board. And so went with the second tight end.
Awesome. Well, you were making your pick here at the 14:06. Who did you end up going with here?
I'm timing. I think I'm going to time out.
It seems like Raquel Armstead was assigned to you. Would you be okay with Raquel Armstead if it were to go back? Is he out of the question for you now that Chris Thompson's on the roster? Or do you like?
Yeah,
Armstead?
No, I think Armstead's probably the 3rd running back at best. I'm trying to go wide receiver here and go with Harry, but I didn't get to. I didn't press him.
I don't know if Yates is going to take him, so he might come back to you.
Yeah.
We'll see.
And I totally agree, by the way, on Cam Newton helping Harry. I think ultimately at that spot you just want high upside guys, and I think that year 1 to year 2 leap is something you also you a lot of times see at the wide receiver position. So I'm willing to take a gamble on a guy like that.
Yeah, I was considering, considering in air quotations there, considering Harry with my last pick, and he's still here at the 14:08. We're talking about, I've got 2 bench spots left, guys. So again, taking these flyers, I'm going to take these guys. So if it works out with Harry, great. If not, I can cut him. I am going to take him here at the 14:08 and add him to my bench.
All right. So, this is where, again, these are going to be the last 2 picks of my draft, and I'm looking for pure upside because if these guys don't pan out, they're guys that I'm going to cut for the waiver wire pickups, which in weeks 1 and 2 are the most important because we're obviously finding out the roles in the offense. So I'm going to take John Ross. I'm projecting him to be a starter in this offense, 3 wide receiver sets. And obviously with Burrow there, deep ball accuracy is paramount. And I like it. D.D. Westbrook is someone I like this late. He was drafted as a top 30 wide receiver last year, and his role hasn't really changed.
Right.
That team's going to throw a lot. I think that he's a value this late in drafts, and I'm trying to decide between him or do I take a running back that's way down the depth chart. I do not see. I'm going to make sure that he's not there before I make my pick. Yes, it seems like someone did take Damian Harris. He went
a couple rounds earlier.
Yeah, he would have been my pick here if he was available, but instead I am going to take D.D. Westbrook. I know it's not sexy, but at the same time, there's a role that he's going to fill. He is clearly the number 2 option behind DJ Chark. Chenault is going to be battling with Chris Conley for that third wide receiver spot, but Westbrook's role hasn't changed in the slot there, and Jay Gruden has made slot receivers work. I mean, just go back to Jamison Crowder in Washington.
That's who I was going to be taking if he was still there 3 picks later. So I like the pick there. Again, you mentioned it. Not a whole lot has changed for him in Jacksonville. And again, this team is going to have to be throwing the ball a ton. So I like the pick there. All right, 1505. It's my final pick here. I'm looking at guys like Noah Fant is still there. So I could potentially take him to be a safe backup option behind Jonnu Smith if that doesn't work out. He's someone who I'm considering. Chris, I'm going to leave Daniel Jones for you if you want to draft him in a couple picks. He's still on the board. Otherwise, it's guys like James Washington, Tyrell Williams, Chris Thompson. These aren't guys that I'm interested in drafting at all, no matter how far they fall. So I am going to take Corey Davis, though. I think Corey Davis is a guy, again, we're talking about pure upside at the position. He's someone who it hasn't clicked up to this point in the NFL, but if we're talking about hopefully just grabbing this guy in the back of the 15th round like we did Devontae Parker last year, and if the light turns on, if everything clicks for him, then I've got a solid option. So I'll draft him here to be my final bench wide receiver.
I'd just like to say that I hope Corey Davis is 2020's version of Devontae Parker. That's all I can hope.
All right, Chris, you are on the clock here at the 15:07 for your final pick. Who are you going with?
I'm going to go with Miles Boykin here, and I like having him on my teams as a last guy on the bench at wide receiver. And the reason being is that we kind of talked about it in Baltimore. A lot of change in turnover at the pass catcher positions. Hayden Hurst is gone. They used to run a lot of 3 tight end sets even. And then you also have Seth Roberts gone, which was like an underrated guy leaving. Him and Boykin were splitting the perimeter role. Boykin could be an every down player this year because Devin Duvernay, the 3rd rounder, he's kind of more of a slot guy. I think Willie Snead's long-term replacement. And Boykin, 17.2 average depth to target. His quarterback led the league in touchdown passes. He's a guy drafted on day 2, going from year 1 to year 2. He kind of checks all the boxes as a guy like, let's say, a DJ Chark last year, who kind of comes out of nowhere and makes that jump. If there's a short list of guys that could potentially do that this year, and I'm just searching for those guys. Chark, who was it? AJ Brown. There's a few guys that kind of made the difference at wide receiver that you could get late last year that could have won you a league or got you close. So Boykin is one of those guys on that short list for me this year.
Yeah, if there's any guy that's worth taking a shot with your last pick, Boykin fits the criteria there. I like how you laid that out. All right, guys, the draft is done. Let's go through our draft grades here. Chris, you get to start us off. What did you end up with?
So I got an A-, and I think I took quarterback too early. Like if I look back on if I hadn't timed out with Wentz, I would have had Crowder, and then I would have still gotten Daniel Jones, and I would have liked that setup. And this is why I tell people, first of all, don't time out, but second of all, always wait on quarterback because you're gonna just like the way your team looks, and you're gonna like the depth that you have a little bit later on. But I got a A-, 92 out of 100.
Okay, perfect. Tags, what did you get?
I got an 89 out of 100. I got a B+, and I'm a little upset with my grade. I liked my draft an awful lot, and I have a feeling that Yates is going to tell us that he won this draft.
I am. I got a 93 out of 100. So Bobby leaves, and I finally win one. But no, I want to go through the teams here because, Tags, I really did like your team, and I think that the draft grade, it's a little bit down based on the rest of us, or either of us, both of us, but I really did like your team. So Tags, let's go through your team, and then Chris will go through yours just to kind of give a recap here.
Yeah, it's close though. I mean, I'm looking at the leaderboard in terms of the final standings that they have. It was a 9-point difference between us in the top 4. Yates, you were number 1 in our draft. Raybon 2. Team 8 was 3. I was 4.
Okay.
So yeah, it was very, very close at the top. So my roster is Tom Brady at quarterback, my running backs Saquon Barkley and Jonathan Taylor, Kareem Hunt, Ronald Jones, Latavius Murray. I love those running backs. I mean, if I could wind up with them in my draft, I'm happy. Wide receivers, Allen Robinson, DK Metcalf, Tyler Boyd, Christian Kirk, Jalen Reagor, Dede Westbrook, Paris Campbell, and John Ross. And my tight end, George Kittle. I mean, I don't think I could draft a better team, to be honest with you.
Yeah.
I like it. And,
I like it too.
And keep in mind that the scores that you get in these, now some people are saying, how do you win a mock draft? Well, the scores you get in here is based on all the analysts in the industry create the score and everything. It's all combined into one. So your rankings may differ from them, and it's going to hurt your draft rate a little bit. But at the same time, as long as you're near the top, you're doing good.
Yeah, for sure. A top 4 finish is not bad by any means. Chris, what did your final team look like?
So I have
Daniel Jones at quarterback.
Right, yeah. I wanted Daniel Jones at quarterback, but I ended up timing out and getting Carson Wentz, Derrick Henry, David Johnson, James White, who I liked for the value at running back, along with Jordan Howard and Tony Pollard. So I think those running backs, I have a good mix of kind of upside with Henry, top 5 upside, a lot of stability in the middle round in terms of volume, and then the upside guy for my bench in Pollard. Wide receiver, Tyreek Hill, Cooper Kupp, Jarvis Landry, Deshaun Jackson, Will Fuller, and Miles Boykin. So again, I would have liked to add Crowder a little earlier, but ended up getting Wentz. But still like, especially Will Fuller as my wide receiver number 4. Again, I think this is one of the guys with that top 10 upside, just based on what he's done. Even with Hopkins and what I think his role is going to be. It's just a matter of injuries, which you can always just cut him or bench him or whatever you need to do in a league like this. And then at tight end, I have Mark Andrews and Austin Hooper. And wouldn't always go with a second tight end. Do think there's a drop-off after these, top 4 at tight end. So getting Andrews to me was important. And then Hooper is just a guy who, once you start getting into those late rounds, it's who's going to get the remaining targets that are undrafted across the board. And I just think Hooper, even though he's in for a downgrade based on what Atlanta did last year to based on what I think Cleveland's going to do volume-wise, Hooper's still going to be a top 3 target for his team, and I project to get targeted more than the other wide receivers on the board, so I went with him.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, if we were in a league together and I went up against you and I saw that you had both Will Fuller and Deshaun Jackson in your flex, I would be terrified. I would just be absolutely terrified because one big play and I've lost my week. So, all right, I'm going to go through my team here really quick. I got Josh Allen at quarterback, and then at running back, I have Alvin Kamara, Austin Ekeler, DeAndre Swift, J.K. Dobbins, Tariq Cohen, and Duke Johnson. And then at wide receiver, I have Chris Godwin, Calvin Ridley, Devontae Parker, Anthony Miller, Curtis Samuel, N'Keal Harry, and Corey Davis. And then at tight end, I have Jonnu Smith. So I feel like it's a really solid team of upside guys, but then also pairing it with some safe players at the position. So I'm pretty happy with how it turned out.
Yeah, no, that's a solid roster. I mean, you're higher on Jonnu Smith than me, but I like going through your wide receivers and your running backs. I mean, that's a stacked roster.
Jonnu's in that kind of, if there's a poor, and I mean poor, but a poor man's version of kind of what Mark Andrews did last year, it's Jonnu Smith. He's a guy who, once Tannehill took over, he was targeted on nearly 20% of his routes, up from, I think he was somewhere in the 13%. Not usually targeted a lot, but that completely changed when Tannehill took over. The problem with Jonnu is that he only ran a route on about 60% of the dropbacks, or even a little under that. So if Jonnu Smith starts being used like a more traditional number 1 tight end, like a Delaney Walker, and you combine that with his increased target share with Tannehill, then you have a situation where, yes, AJ Brown's the number 1 receiver, but maybe Jonnu leads them in touchdowns, and maybe he's the clear number 2 over Davis. So there is some breakout appeal, but I do agree, as the number 1 tight end, you are a little worried, and you might end up streaming a little bit.
Yeah, for sure. If it doesn't work right away, then I grabbed him in the late rounds. So again, it's not heavy draft capital investment there. So, all right, guys. Anything else before we need to get out of here?
No, I mean, we're going to be doing a lot of mock drafts throughout the offseason, so stay tuned. We're going to start messing with some of those late round strategies and like the strategies that are inside the mock draft. So go ahead and practice, guys, because that's what's going to make you better. You're going to find out what you like when you draft a team, because believe me, I get to the end of mock drafts at times and I'm like, I drafted this team?
Right. All right, guys, that's going to wrap up the episode today. Chris, thank you so much for joining us, man. We appreciate it.
Thanks for having me, guys. It was fun.
Absolutely. Don't forget to check out his work on Twitter at Chris Raybon. We'll be back later on this week with some more content for you all to make sure that you're prepared for your fantasy football drafts this season. Until then, from Mike Tagliere and Chris Raybon, I'm Kyle Yates, and we'll see you next time.
Thanks for watching. And while you're here, make sure you subscribe to the Fantasy Pros YouTube channel to get access to free content to help you make the best decisions in your fantasy football lineup and get the edge over your opponents.